Hey everybody, I'm Jonathan with Bi-vocational ministry. One of the biggest issues in regards to ministry that we talk about usually is church structure. Who is supposed to lead the church? Is a single pastor biblical, or does it have to be a group of elders, as some would say? How do the deacons function? And when you get in ministry, these conversations become very important, and I'm going to go over some of that with you. And we're going to start with the first and second century church in regards to how Ignatius viewed church structure. So stay with me. Okay, everybody. So I'm going to go over how church structure is supposed to be handled. And one of the best things I think we could do is, outside of going to the scriptural text and trying to exegete the text and say, this is what we think is a biblical church structure, this is what we don't think is a biblical church structure, these are the offices within the church and how they should function within the body. And I want to go over this, how Ignatius viewed church structure. You're like, well, John, what's the point about Ignatius? Why does Ignatius matter? And I'm only going to be going over one of his letters, which is the letter to the Ephesians. But here, let me tell you why. Ignatius was probably a fellow disciple of the Apostle John with Polycarp. We know Polycarp was a disciple of John, the Apostle John, and served as a bishop. And Ignatius was probably right there with John. They don't know exactly when this letter was written, but it was written before 107 to 116 AD into the second century. This is less than 100 years after Jesus died and after the first century where the church spread and Christianity grew. My goal in looking at the early church fathers, early church leaders, is how did they view church? How did they view the faith? What did they view about doctrine? In regards to today, how did they view church structure? And Ignatius gives us some insights into how he viewed church structure and what he was actually talking, who he was talking to, and how he addressed the churches. He gives us a lot of evidence for this. Now, to give you another little part of Ignatius, when he was writing his letters, he was on his way to be martyred. He was condemned as a Christian, and he was the bishop or overseer of Syria, of the church in Syria. But he was on his way to be martyred for the faith, and so he's writing all these letters to these different churches and people before he dies. And in these letters, we learn a little bit about what the church structure was back then. And this matters because the debate on single pastor, board of elders, how do deacons function, all this stuff, as much as we like to say, oh, we have settled that. Well, we haven't settled it in the sense that the church as a whole has come to some kind of conclusion. But there are some things about the first and second century churches, less than 100 years after Jesus died, and how they operated their churches. So I'm going to walk you through this, and we're going to look at the different passages from this first epistle from Ignatius, and we're going to learn about how these churches were structured. So let me get on that. All right, so the first thing that we learn about these churches is that, according to Ignatius, these churches had one bishop. One bishop. And the way, from the context I'm seeing of Ignatius so far, this bishop would have been known as the shepherd of that flock. Would have been known as the shepherd of the flock, or today what we would know as a pastor. And so you had this one guy in regards to the church that was known as the bishop. As far as I've read up to this point, Ignatius only refers to bishops singularly. He didn't say the bishops of your flock. And for what it's worth, the bishop here is the overseer. Okay? That's the modern equivalent for the word bishop. That's our modern equivalent. So you have the bishop, who's the overseer of the flock, the shepherd and pastor, and he only refers to him as a single entity. So when we talk about, is there such thing as a single pastor church? Is that possible, or is that biblical? Evidently, Ignatius thought so, because he refers to the Ephesians and he talks about the bishop. Now let me go to you. Let me tell you where to read this to you, so you know I'm getting it from this epistle. I'm getting this from the Ante-Nicene Fathers. It's a book. It's 10 volumes. It's very, very helpful. And let me read this to you. It says, this is from Ignatius to the church at Ephesus. It says, I have therefore received your whole multitude in the name of God through Onesimus. That's the name, Onesimus. A man of inexpressible love, and who is your bishop, singular. And I pray you by Jesus Christ to love, and that you would all seek to be like him. What a great pastor. A guy who, he says, be like Onesimus. Be like him. He goes, blessed be God who has granted unto you, who are yourselves so excellent, to obtain such an excellent bishop. Again, we see this as a singular. He's talking to a singular bishop amongst the group, the Ephesians. But then, so the church structure does have such thing as a singular bishop over a congregation or even a whole city. So when we're talking about the church at Ephesus, if this was multiple congregations in the city of Ephesus, then this bishop could actually probably oversee these different congregations of the cities. Now you're like, yeah, but John, what about Titus 1, where Paul says, where Paul tells Titus, go appoint elders in every city. Okay? Because when I was in Bible college, they taught us that elder, bishop, and pastor were used interchangeably. And that these things were basically all the same thing. An elder was a pastor, was a bishop, was an overseer. Elder was a pastor, was an overseer. But according to Ignatius, that's actually not the case. He actually differentiates between a bishop or an overseer and a pastor and the presbytery. I'm going to read to you here where it says, and that being subject to the bishop, singular, and the presbytery, ye may in all respects be sanctified. So with the bishop or the overseer, you had a board of elders / the presbytery. Okay? You have the board of elders, and they would extend out, and these could be more than, ever how many the church needs. Now, some would say that the bishop or the overseer and that the elders would actually be the pastors of the individual congregations who were working under the bishop. I actually don't necessarily see that in the text. What I see basically at this point is that the bishop was the overseer, he was the shepherd and pastor, the elders of the presbytery were basically his counsel. It was like a church council that he had to work through. It was his safety net. And if you're talking about any kind of ministry, when I worked with the ministry, it is almost impossible to be successful at church discipline and all the different functions that you have to do as a pastor by yourself. When I was in ministry and I had a couple pastors underneath me, which was okay. And when I was an individual pastor, I actually had to pull men in from the congregation to be my buffer, to be my counsel, to be my share of the responsibility so I wasn't singled out. So I see this as you can have a bishop who's an overseer and a pastor, you have elders or a presbytery that works with them, and they are like a counsel for the overseer, or they help oversee the congregations and all that. Now, I will say this, the reason why I differentiate between the two, because some from my past, they would say, well, elders and bishops are the same thing. Not really, because Ignatius in the Magnesians, not Magnesiums, Magnesians, he actually tells them, listen, just because your bishop is youthful, okay, so a bishop can actually be a young guy. A bishop can be a young guy. He tells that to the Magnesians. He goes, you should listen to your bishop even though he's young. So you should listen to your bishop even though he's young. He's a man of God. He's telling you he's got the support of the elders and presbytery. You should listen to him. Okay? Alrighty. And then, to go further, and he says that, and that would be chapter 2. Chapter 3 is, or the chapter 4 is the next time he's mentioned. He goes, wherefore it is fitting that ye also should run together in accordance with the will of the bishop, remember singular, bishop singular, who is God's appointment, rules over you. So this is an overseer. He's actually ruling or managing the house of God. He goes, which thing indeed yourselves do, being instructed by the Spirit, for your justly renowned presbytery, okay, being worthy of God, is fitted as exactly to the bishop as the strings are to the harp. So he's now talking about you, the bishop, presbytery. We know, like I don't have a harp, but you know, a harp has all these strings, and all the strings are connected to the outside of the harp, and he basically is making this case that this whole system is like a musical instrument. It all works in harmony, all works together. The bishop is like the frame of the harp, the presbytery are like the strings of the harp, and they all work together to form this musical instruments. And he's using this as an illustration here. Thus being joined together in concord and harmonious love, of which Jesus Christ is the captain and guardian. So Jesus Christ is captain and guardian. Overseer is the frame of the harp, or you could say the body of the guitar, and the strings are the elders and the presbytery, and they are the ones who, and it all works together in harmony. Okay, so you see this right there. Then I'm moving on to chapter 6, chapter 5, where he brings it up again. He goes, "Do ye, beloved," let me make sure I'm not missing out in here. No. "Do ye, beloved, be careful to be subject to the bishop and the presbyterians," and then now he brings in another topic, "and the deacons." Okay? Subject would be someone that you would work under or work with. And so when I say here, he's mentioned this is numerous times mentioning it. And this is how I'm seeing it break down. You have an overseer, which is a bishop, shepherd, pastor. It could be a young guy. And then with him, you have elders and presbyterian, older, wiser, godly men who are joining with this overseer or pastor and helping him execute his duties and execute the duties of the church. And then you have the deacons that are serving with them. So you have the elders, which are the presbytery, and I want to label this, I don't know if you can see this. You have the older ones. Okay? And then you have the deacons, which are the serving ones. Now, okay? Hopefully you can read all that. You can have a bishop. He's a pastor of the church. Elders and presbytery, which are the older ones that go with him and work with him, and then you have the deacons, where the serving ones are the ones who are the hands and feet. They're the Acts 6 people. They're serving and waiting on tables, and that way the bishop and the bishop and pastor can focus on prayer and the preaching of the Word of God. The elders and older ones help give him counsel and lead the church in a godly direction. The deacons do the material needs of the body of believers of the church. And so now we see these in here. And then I'm going to read chapter 6, where it says, "It is manifested for that we should look upon the bishop, even as if we would look upon the Lord himself, standing as he does before the Lord. For it behooves the man who looks carefully about him, that is active in his business, to stand before kings and not stand before the slothful men. And indeed, Onesimus himself greatly commends your good order in God, that ye all live according to the truth, and that no sect has any dwelling place among you." Onesimus here is overseeing this church. He's making sure. "Nor indeed do ye hearken to any rather than to Jesus Christ, the true shepherd and teacher." That's why I thought that this why here, shepherd, pastor, would be that. So basically, Onesimus, he's an under shepherd, he's an under pastor, he's an under teacher. But the true teacher, the true shepherd, is Jesus Christ. Onesimus, he says, he's commending the church at Ephesus, saying, hey, they're submitted to Jesus Christ. And that is actually the role of a pastor. The pastor is not to walk around saying, hey, you should listen to me. The pastor is to say, hey, we should obey Christ. You should follow Christ. You should heed Christ. He's standing before the Lord, who is one who will give an account, as an overseer of the church. And evidently Onesimus did a really great job at this. And Ignatius, before or around 100 AD, is giving this, commending him in regards to this. And then you have chapter 20, which is next. Chapter 20 says this. Okay. And he's about to end this letter to the Ephesians, and he goes, "But of the seed of David according to the flesh, but under the guidance of the Comforter," that's the Holy Spirit, "in the obedience to the bishop," again singular, "and the presbytery, with an undivided mind, breaking one and the same bread, which is the medicine of immortality, and the antidote which prevents us from dying, but the cleansing remedy, driving away evil, that we should live in God through Jesus Christ. So remember again, he's mentioning the bishop singular, and he's mentioning the presbytery as plural. Now, let me read to you again, because now I have a little bit of time here. Deacons are the serving ones, okay? These are the people who do the material work of the body. They're overseeing the needs of the body. They're distributing physical needs to people. They're taking it. They're the serving ones of the church. These are the connecting ones. So if someone has an issue with the church with like a certain need or whatever, the widows who need taken care of, or this is where the deacons would come in. You have the elders or presbytery. These are the older ones. It's not that these don't serve, but their biggest service is that they are older, wiser ones for the bishop. And then you have a bishop, and again, according to Magnesians, his letter to the Magnesians, he could be a young guy, but he's an overseer, shepherd, and pastor. Let's see here. Let me read to you again from this, and I want to answer one objection. It says, "It is manifest, therefore, that we should look upon the bishop, even as we would look upon the Lord himself, standing as he does before the Lord." So the overseer stands before the Lord. "For it behooves the man who looks carefully about him and is active in his business to stand before kings and not stand before slothful men. And indeed Onesimus himself greatly commends your good order in God, that ye all live according to the truth, and that no sect has any dwelling place among you." That's why it's hard to be a pastor. Everybody's like, "Pastor, why do you make such a big deal about good teaching and good order and all that?" Because he has to. He's accountable to God for it. Okay. "Nor indeed do ye hearken to any other rather than Jesus Christ, the true shepherd and teacher." The whole point of the pastor is not to get you to look at him. The whole point of the pastor is to get you to look at Christ. Now, let me deal with this. Someone will say, "Well, John, that sounds great and all that, but what about abuse? What about a pastor who just thinks he has all the authority and you can't question anything he says, and you can't, and if you dare, you're a heretic and he'll throw you out of the church?" That's why it's important that the church takes seriously that this bishop is a qualified individual. 1 Timothy 3 gives qualifications for a bishop. Titus 1 gives qualifications for elders. It's important that this man, these men, and these men are qualified individuals. Because, so for what it's worth, I have been with bishops who were not qualified bishops, and they abused their office. I have worked with older people who were not qualified. They might have been older in age, but they were definitely not spiritually mature, and they had horrible track records. But they were put into office because that's tradition, and because I like him, and they're my friend, and I've known him forever, and I know that he's not really qualified. But if I don't put him in, I'm going to hurt his feelings. Bad idea. Be careful who you put in. And even as deacons, I've served with deacons that are absolutely amazing. I go to a church now where the deacons are absolutely amazing. They're absolutely amazing. I love them. Wonderful people. I served at a church when I was in Bible college. Amazing deacons. Amazing. And that's why that matters. So all of this to say is qualification. Qualification. Remember the compliment Ignatius gave to Onesimus is that he was an excellent bishop. You want excellent leaders. You want an excellent bishop or overseer. Or pastor. You want excellent elders. You want excellent deacons. And if you look through scriptures, particularly the pastoral epistles, 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, you're going to see qualifications there, and from Peter. You got some in Peter too. But you're going to see things in there where they actually talk about this is what it should look like. And this is the qualifications to be an elder. These are the qualifications to be deacons. This is the qualifications to be a pastor. Hold on to that and make sure that those men are living up to that. Because if they're not, no wonder there's so much abuse in the church. We should be a lot slower about pointing leaders within the church. So I could say a lot more, but in regards to the text of Ignatius to the Ephesian church on his way to die for the faith, according to him, as far as I can understand from the text, and I'm still going to go through this, and this is just one letter to the church at Ephesus, and he's written numerous letters that I'm hopefully go through. And again, want to re-emphasize that this is before, at the latest, 116 AD. Most likely 107 AD, and maybe even earlier. Okay, this is someone who sat under the Apostle John with Polycarp, who was another church leader, and yet, and this is someone who actually, so he actually is connected to the apostles, and he's serving as a bishop, and this is the structure he's advocating for. So when we read our scriptures and we say, oh, well, is it a board of elder that leads? Is it a bishop? Is it an overseer? Is it a board of bishops? What is it? Well, according to Ignatius, it is what we talked about today. So I'm probably going to do some more of these. Let me know what you think. Do you like this kind of thing? Is this interesting to you? Bring us some scripture references. Well, John, how does that fit in that? I don't have all the answers. I'm just kind of investigating. Thought you'd like to join me. So on that note, you guys have a great day, and God bless.